Is the West secretly controlling Africa while Africans are busy celebrating fake independence? Burkina Faso recently announced it won't say yes to puppet alliances. But what is Burkina Faso pointing toward? Experts say Burkina Faso's bold stand is the beginning of the end for Western dominance in Africa. They have made all Africans question whether they are free, or is it just a well-crafted illusion? Let's find out. The recent stand by Burkina Faso to reject Western-dominated alliances is not just a bold political move, it's a wake-up call for the entire African continent.
Most of our African leaders are not free. When one is not free, one cannot determine a destiny for their own people.
As the nation joins forces with Mali and Niger to create a confederation, the cracks in Western dominance are beginning to show. This defiance reflects a larger movement for real independence, breaking away from the colonial stranglehold that's lasted far too long. But what made Burkina Faso the first African nation to openly reject Western control? Burkina Faso's decision to reject puppet alliances didn't happen in a vacuum. Captain Ibrahim Traore, the young and bold leader of Burkina Faso, didn't just wake up one morning and decide to defy the West on a whim. His decision is rooted in a deep historical context that dates back to colonial times, when France exercised brutal control over its colonies, stripping nations of their resources, culture, and identity. But even after so-called independence, this control never truly went away. France maintained a strategic grip over its former colonies through a combination of financial manipulation, political pressure, and military influence. In Francophone Africa, countries like Burkina Faso are still economically shackled by the CFA franc, a currency that's controlled by the French treasury. The deeper problem is this: Western countries, particularly France, have built a system where African nations remain economically and politically dependent. Aid, loans, and military support are cleverly designed tools of manipulation, keeping these nations bound to their former colonial masters. The narrative pushed by the West is simple: Africa cannot survive without us. But that's the lie Captain Traore has chosen to reject. Burkina Faso's leadership has become a symbol of resistance, not just against foreign domination, but against the entire Western-controlled global order. Traore is willing to risk economic retaliation, political destabilization, and even military intervention to assert Burkina Faso's right to true sovereignty. By prioritizing national security over attendance at the China-Africa Summit, Traore signaled to the world that Burkina Faso's interests lie in safeguarding its people and its future, not in bowing to external pressures. But here's the critical point: Burkina Faso's defiance isn't just about rejecting foreign influence, it's about setting an example. By taking a stand, Traore is daring other African nations to wake up. He's challenging the belief that African nations need the West to survive. In reality, what Africa needs is political courage, the kind that leaders like Traore are beginning to show. From an African historical standpoint, Burkina Faso's current defiance is reminiscent of the ideals of legendary leaders like Thomas Sankara, who once led Burkina Faso with a vision for African self-reliance. Sankara famously rejected foreign aid, choosing instead to build Burkina Faso's infrastructure, economy, and social services using local resources. His message was simple: Africa must take care of itself, not rely on foreign powers to determine its destiny. Sankara's assassination was orchestrated by external powers, but his vision lives on in the bold decisions of leaders like Traore. With Burkina Faso standing firm, the question now becomes, why aren't other African nations following suit? What's stopping them? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. The sad truth is that most African leaders are trapped in dependency and fear. To understand why they aren't taking bold steps like Burkina Faso, we need to look at how Western powers have designed a system that keeps African nations perpetually reliant on them. From a young age, many African leaders are groomed and educated in Western institutions, where they are subtly indoctrinated into believing that Western aid, expertise, and governance models are necessary for African development. The international financial institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund (IMF) play an enormous role in this manipulation. Through aid packages and structural adjustment programs, these organizations offer loans to African nations, loans that come with strings attached. These strings often include conditions that force African nations to privatize their industries, open their markets to Western corporations, and reduce government spending on social services. The result? African economies remain weak, dependent, and easy to manipulate. Apart from this, many African leaders are not simply unaware of this manipulation, they are complicit in it. They have grown accustomed to living luxuriously off Western aid and enjoy the perks of aligning with foreign powers. The idea of breaking away from Western support terrifies them because they fear losing not only their wealth, but also their political power. When you've been relying on foreign aid and military support for decades, the idea of standing on your own 2 feet can be intimidating. There's also the element of fear. The West has shown time and time again that it will use any means necessary to maintain control over African nations. We've seen the assassinations of African leaders like Patrice Lumumba and Thomas Sankara, both of whom dared to challenge Western interests. The West is not above orchestrating coups, funding insurgencies, or imposing economic sanctions to remove any leader who dares to break away. Other African leaders have seen what happens to those who stand up to the West, and many are simply too afraid to take that risk. But fear and dependency come at a cost. As long as African leaders continue to bow to the West, their countries will never experience true progress. They will remain trapped in a cycle of poverty, instability, and exploitation. So, if Burkina Faso and its allies can stand up to the West, what does that mean for Africa's future? Could this be the start of a new era? On September 16, 2023, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger took a bold step that could change the course of African history. By forming a confederation, these 3 nations signaled their desire to break away from the old system of Western dependency and forge a new path, one that prioritizes African unity, cooperation, and self-determination. This confederation isn't just symbolic, it's a direct challenge to the power structures that have kept Africa divided and weak for so long. Let's put this into perspective. For decades, the West has benefited from a divided Africa. By keeping African nations fractured and competing against one another, Western powers have been able to exploit Africa's resources, influence its politics, and control its future. But the Burkina Faso-Mali-Niger Confederation is a threat to that system. These nations are showing the world, and other African countries, that unity is possible, and that unity is the key to true independence. The Confederation is not just about breaking free from the West, it's about creating an alternative model for African development. For years, African nations have been forced to rely on Western development models, which have done little to address the continent's unique challenges. The Confederation offers a new approach, one that focuses on self-reliance, resource sharing, and regional cooperation. By pooling their resources and expertise, these nations can build infrastructure, strengthen their economies, and improve the lives of their people, without having to beg for scraps from the West. The Confederation also has the potential to inspire other African nations to join the movement. If more nations unite under a similar framework, Africa could become a formidable force on the global stage. Imagine a united Africa negotiating trade deals with China, the European Union, or the United States as one powerful entity instead of 54 fragmented states. The West wouldn't stand a chance, but there's a risk. The Confederation threatens the status quo, and the West will undoubtedly try to undermine it. Whether through economic sanctions, propaganda, or even military intervention, the West will not sit idly by while Africa slips out of its control. The leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are well aware of this, and they are prepared for the challenges ahead. But the question remains, are the other African nations ready to follow their lead? Historically, attempts at African unity have often failed due to internal divisions and external pressures. For example, the Pan-African dream, first voiced by leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, never truly materialized because of these divisions. However, the geopolitical landscape is shifting, and with new alliances being forged, especially with powers like China, there is renewed hope for African unity. The confederation between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger could become the nucleus for a broader African movement. By presenting a united front, these countries are demonstrating that it's possible to break free from foreign control. But an important question here is whether Africa can industrialize and modernize without the West. Is true progress possible without the reliance on Western aid and investment? Africa's industrialization has long been hampered by external dependencies. The West has embedded itself in Africa's development by offering assistance in the form of loans, aid packages, and investment. But here's the catch. This assistance is rarely altruistic. Instead, it's a sophisticated form of control. Western powers know that by keeping African nations reliant on their financial and technical support, they can continue to manipulate political and economic outcomes. The result? African nations are locked in a perpetual state of underdevelopment, unable to harness their full potential. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are now poised to break this cycle. By rejecting Western influence and looking toward alternative partners, like China, they are seeking to industrialize on their terms. China's model of infrastructure development has proven successful across many regions, and its willingness to invest in African energy, transportation, and technology without the heavy-handed political conditions imposed by the West makes it an attractive partner. Take, for example, energy. Energy infrastructure is a key stumbling block for African development. Burkina Faso, like many other African nations, faces regular power outages, which hinder economic growth and make industrialization almost impossible. However, China has been investing heavily in African energy projects, providing not just the financing, but also the expertise needed to build power plants and other critical infrastructure. This model of cooperation is less exploitative than Western aid, which often comes with conditions that undermine sovereignty.
As it concerns the industrialization and modernization of agriculture. In this regard, China serves as a reference for US. In less than a century, China has industrialized, modernized its agriculture, achieved food self-sufficiency, and began exporting its products.
The West is quick to criticize Chinese involvement in Africa, labeling it neo-colonialism. But let's be honest here. It's the West that has a long history of colonialism and exploitation in Africa. African nations are not naive. They understand the difference between a partnership built on mutual respect and one that seeks to maintain control. By rejecting the strings attached to Western aid, African nations can finally start building infrastructure that serves their people, not foreign investors. The modernization of agriculture is another crucial aspect. For decades, Africa has been viewed as a source of raw materials for the West, exporting unprocessed goods that generate little value for local economies. To reverse this trend, African nations need to invest in modern agriculture and food processing industries. Burkina Faso has begun taking steps in this direction, and with the support of partners like China, it's focusing on developing the infrastructure necessary to achieve food security and industrialize its agriculture. However, industrialization doesn't happen overnight. It requires not only energy and infrastructure, but also political will and long-term vision. African leaders must prioritize investments in education, technology, and manufacturing. By focusing on industries that leverage local resources and expertise, Africa can develop a self-sustaining economy, independent of Western influence. While industrialization is a critical step, Africa cannot progress without full economic integration. So if Africa is ready for independence, why hasn't full economic integration happened yet? The African Continental Free Trade Area (AfCFTA) was supposed to be a game changer for Africa, a framework for creating a single market that would drive economic growth and integration across the continent. In theory, AfCFTA would eliminate trade barriers, promote the free movement of people and goods, and allow African nations to negotiate as a united bloc. So, what's the problem? Why hasn't this vision materialized? The answer is twofold: internal division and external interference. African nations are still deeply divided along ethnic, linguistic, and political lines. Many of these divisions were exacerbated during the colonial era when European powers arbitrarily drew borders that split ethnic groups and forced rivals to coexist within newly formed states. These divisions continue to hamper economic cooperation today. Moreover, the West has a vested interest in maintaining Africa's fragmentation. A united Africa would be a formidable economic and political force, too powerful to control. So, through covert means, Western powers have worked to undermine African unity. Trade agreements are disrupted, political alliances are manipulated, and conflicts are fueled to ensure that African nations remain too weak and divided to pose a threat. Another major obstacle is infrastructure. For African economies to integrate fully, there must be reliable infrastructure: roads, railways, ports, and airports that can facilitate trade. Without this infrastructure, goods cannot move freely between countries, and the dream of economic integration will remain just that, a dream. Burkina Faso and its confederation partners have already recognized this and are investing heavily in infrastructure development, particularly in rail projects that will link their economies more closely. But again, this will take time, and without broader African cooperation, it won't be enough to achieve full integration. However, the greatest obstacle to African integration is the political class itself. Many African leaders are more interested in maintaining their power and protecting their interests than in working toward a collective future for the continent. Some of these leaders are beholden to foreign powers, making decisions that benefit external interests over those of their people. This self-serving political elite is one of the key reasons why African unity remains elusive.
In Africa today, particularly in Francophone Africa, many heads of state still take instructions from Paris, London, or elsewhere before making any decisions.
De Londres, de Washington, avant de prendre une décision quelconque. Nous avons des chefs d'État.
We have leaders who prefer to ally with Paris or Washington to fight against their own African brothers.
And Burkina Faso's rejection of alliances with such puppets before Africa is changing. So, there's hope. Apart from that, the younger generation of Africans is more connected and more aware of the need for unity than any previous generation. Social media, mobile technology, and improved education systems are fostering a sense of Pan-Africanism that could overcome the political divisions of the past. Young Africans are increasingly pushing for change, and they recognize that economic integration is the key to a prosperous future. The challenge will be whether these young voices can influence the political class and push them toward a more unified vision for the continent. So, to sum this up, the future of Africa is at a crossroads. How long will Africans allow outsiders to dictate their future while they pretend to be free? Let us know in the comment section. Are you ready to face the reality that Africa's future rests in the hands of those bold enough to reject puppet alliances? The time for half-truths is over. The path to Africa's freedom is clear. Now the question is, will we take it? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.